Today's video, we're going to be talking about dealing with corrosion in the floor and some of the options that you have and how ultimately I took care of it. This video is it's prompted by Baptista Killer, who asks, could you show how I took care of the floor pans, treatment, products, advices, and he's in the process of restoring his 68 MGB. He's got some small holes in the floor plan. So I had not taken videos of any of the process. A lot of the welding stuff that I do, I really can't tote my phone around while I'm doing it. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and do kind of a guided tour of some of the pictures that I took before, during, and after, and explain some of the products that I used to solve the problem. The biggest thing when it comes down to figuring out what you're going to do as far as fixing your floor is a matter of cost versus capabilities. So here's a good example. This is what Moss Motors has for their floor panels. $270. Some of these are olders. I don't know if this applies to what you're looking at, but $200 roughly for each side of the floor pan. It's kind of expensive when you think about it. So from my perspective, I have the capability of welding and metal fabrication. So I decided to go a lot cheaper than that. So let me show you what I was dealing with at first. So on the first initial inspection of the Nigel 1977 MGB, you can see there was some corrosion on the driver's side, and these are not pillow pinholes. These are holes, but what they actually are showing is that there's some thinning in the material, even where you can see where there's no voids. By the time you scrape away the rust, you're gonna make another void. So this was the first piece I was looking at right here. This is basically just in front of the front seat, and then under the pedal, here's the gas pedal right there. Under the pedal where your foot sits, this area right in here was worn down and it had some rust. And so I figured, I'll just do some patches. It didn't look like it was too bad on the first inspection, a couple small holes. So I was like, I don't need to spend $200 to buy a whole new floor pan. I'll just patch these up. And so I went to it. First thing you do is you cut out to the point where you can get a good piece of metal to weld to. Part of the thing with welding is you need to have clean, rust-free surface, and it has to be thick enough so that you can manage the heat. Otherwise, you'll get blow through and it'll pop, and you'll just end up cutting more holes than you are patching holes. So I cut away as much as I could from that first section. So I had what looked like some good clean metal, and I fabricated a patch. This patch was made of metal that I got at the Home Depot. Now you might ask, what thickness, what gauge of metal? This is 20 gauge. If you're going to make a whole nother floor and you're going to cut the old floor out completely, you should go 16 to 18 gauge because it's a lot stiffer. And but in this case, 20 gauge is a lot easier to fabricate, and you can bend ribs into it to increase its strength. Frankly, once it gets in place, it's just going to become a part of the webbing, and you don't have to worry about it. So 20 gauge is fine enough for these small patches and easy fabrication. And you can notice around the edges here, I've cleaned away bare metal, because when you're welding, you have to have really good clean surfaces so that the metal, when it pools up, it won't splatter, and you'll get better heat management. You have to just have really good clean metal. You don't want any contamination. When that metal dries up, it'll make a weak weld. So here you go. It's after I did my initial tack welding in there. Not the cleanest weld, but it's going to be covered up with sound barrier anyway. And so you know, you grind it down and you patch up whatever holes that you have. So then you can see the second picture of this section underneath. This is where the foot pedal was. Here's the gas pedal right here. You see now I've taken away all the sound barrier, that kind of tar-like material that they had for the sound barrier. And it looks a lot worse than what my initial evaluation was. There's a lot of rust on the edge here, a lot of pinholes here and there. So what I decided to do on this case was, you know, instead of making a patch and making a patch and making a patch and making a patch, I decided just to go ahead and cut a solid sheet and lay the sheet across here. And instead of doing butt welding, we'll do lap welds. And you can do lap welds across the edges here, across the edges here, and it'll hold it in place. This right here is nice tight cut right here. And this is before I cleaned it all off. I ran some tack welds up in here. And the cool thing about metalworking is, you know, it doesn't have to be perfect when you lay it in there. It has to be the right shape, but you can tack it a little bit and then bang on it and bend it a little bit and then tack it, hold it down and tack it in another section. And it makes it a lot easier. You don't have to make it perfect the very first time that you lay it in there. Just have to get your dimensions correct. So yeah, you can tack a little and then push and then tack and then push and then tack, and you get it all across, and then it closes up. You can see on here that I fabricated ribs, but not all the way to the end. It's really easy to do two-dimensional folds in the metal, but when you get to the point where you just want to have ribs in there, but the ribs don't go from one end to the other, then it gets a little trickier. And so basically what I did on this was I folded them in 2 dimensions, and then I banged them out. When you're banging the metal out, it'll stretch. And again, this is not one of those things where 20 gauge makes it a lot easier to deal with than, you know, the 16 or 18 gauge metal. You'd be banging on it forever. But if you got a good ball peen hammer and an anvil, or even if you just have 2 hammers, you can take like a large hammer and use that as your anvil while you're banging on it. You can get really irregular shapes to poke out of the metal just fine. So anyway, that's what I did with this one. Instead of just making a bunch of little patches, I made one big patch and put it across the area. This is really going to be a good stable improvement. You know, if you cannot weld, you could probably do a solution like this and rivet it in place. As long as you have good metal where your rivets are going in, it would probably be a good stopgap measure until you could afford to get new floor plates altogether. And welding is a skill that not everybody has, but who wants to spend $200 per side just because you have a couple of small holes? Maybe you can just, you know, do a patch like this and rivet it in place. Just an idea. So anyway, all right, so the next thing you do is after you get it all welded, you want to take and mitigate the rust. So what I use is this Rust Converter Ultra. I have, this stuff is really great. It, oops, this is not it. Here we go, Rust Converter Ultra. This stuff is maybe a little pricey. This is the Walmart price, but you can find this at Home Depot as well. It has the primary active ingredient in this, aside from being kind of a slurpy, goopy kind of stuff that you can smear on with a paintbrush. It's phosphoric acid is the primary active ingredient. Phosphoric acid, when it interacts with rust, converts the iron oxide into iron phosphate. and iron phosphate is no longer, it becomes inert. It's no longer interacts with the oxygen. Unlike rust, where rust will continue to rust. Once you put this rust converter on there or treat the rust with phosphoric acid, it'll convert that iron oxide into iron phosphate, and that becomes inert. It's no longer going to rust after that. Another thing that I use for rust protection or rust mitigation is this stuff, concrete and metal prep. This is basically just straight acid. Unlike this rust converter where it's something that you can smear on and let it dry, this stuff you would spray it on or wipe it on and then hose it off, because it's basically just acid. So it will completely remove the rust and leave bare metal. But because this is a metal prep, it'll actually start rusting straight away if you don't put some sort of oil or paint or something on it after the fact. That's how I manage rust. This rust converter and then this concrete metal prep. It's really inexpensive, works really well. Metal selections, if you look at the pricing of the metal here, and if you're going, with something like the 16 gauge, here's a 2 foot by 2 foot section for $50. And you bang that into place and you do a little patch. It's a lot less expensive than buying the whole floor pan. Not to mention, shipping. Those are pretty large and have a lot of shipping expenses involved with that. I have done in the past other floor pan. This is the Mustang that my son and I did. And you see here on this one we cut it completely out, and here you can see the advantage to the Mustang was that it's sold in quarters, so you don't have to buy an entire pan. If you just have one section, you can buy a short section. The MG doesn't have a seat pedestal like the Mustang, so you really can't break it into quarters. But in this case, what we did to mitigate the rust was we painted the whole thing with Pour 15. This rust preventative paint, eventually I think we pulled these pedestals out anyway because we put late model engine or electric seats into this car when we did this one. That's basically how I did that. Now the last thing that we did, here's more of that. You can see up in here, everything has all been covered in, and this stuff, it turns black when it activates. So that's when you know that it's turned the rust into iron phosphate. It turns black. The last thing is, you can see, because we had to pull out all of that sound barrier, we put more sound barrier into it. That stuff's not cheap if you buy it at Moss as sound barrier, but if you go to Home Depot, they sell basically roof patch material that has a sticky face on it, and I'll show you a picture of that in a second here. So anyway, after we patched up all the holes and put little patches in, or in the case in the front there, we did an overlay. Went through, and where we had taken out the old sound barrier, we bought some new sound barrier at the Home Depot. This is the material here. Cut it into strips and put it in the grooves. And then originally the system had this kind of bubbly stuff, and then that went down, and then the carpet went down over that, just like that. Bob's your uncle. And so now we have nice sound flooring with soundproofing, as well as being structurally sound. It's also now soundproof, and that was our solution.